part of the postdoc that I was awarded funding to complete would have involved analysing the data from my original research through a lens of autistic experience. I've made other videos about what happened to the postdoc, but I do feel a responsibility towards that data and towards the information or the insight that it might hold for autistic people and non-autistic people who want to work with autistic people. And so I have begun to try and do that analysis on my own. It won't be as good because I'm not supported in the same way that I was supported when I was in post, but I will do my best. So I've been doing a thematic analysis where different themes emerge from the data, and it's strange because when I applied for the postdoc, I knew that there was data that was about autistic experience in there. You know, I am an autistic researcher, so it's going to be a part of the experience of doing the research, as being autistic is going to be relevant to it. And I had pegged in my head certain bits of the data where you think, oh, that was really autistic of me. But what's strange about doing the analysis is that things emerge that, not that I didn't know were there, but you don't think of as being a thing because they just are how life is. And this is me at the beginning of understanding these themes, so it's not going to be a clear explanation, but it's an invitation to join me on the wandering. So the first theme that I have noticed is the intensity of my sensory experience. And when you read into autistic experience, you find various theories about what's causing this. Some people say autistic people take in more information from the sensory world than non-autistic people. Other people say we're not as good at filtering out the things that we don't need to pay attention to. There's work that shows physiological bases for these sorts of things, like differences in the proteins our brains produce, and all of that stuff is outside of my I read it, but I wouldn't claim a great understanding of it. But I personally am very aware of the sensations around me. That's something that you see reflected in all my work of the last 2 decades running the sensory projects. There's a reason that it's the sensory projects. It's because I have that engagement with sensation that's fairly typical of being autistic. But in the way that you never really realise that you're sensing the world differently. I remember being asked, do you have differences in your sensory processing, Jo? And saying, no, I sense the world completely normally because I've sensed the world how I've sensed the world all along. How would I know that somebody else isn't seeing as much as I am seeing, or isn't hearing as much as I am hearing, until you consciously pay attention to it and think, oh yeah, I was the child who could pick the little metal watch pin up off the big Cornish field. I could just walk out and pick it up. And I am the person who notices those little sounds, oh, yeah, not everybody's feeling these things like me. Just in the same way that you don't notice that you're experiencing things differently, you don't consciously choose how to cope with it. So I'm an autistic person who faces relatively few barriers to access, but I definitely have coping strategies that I'm employing in order to cope with my sensory world. And they're not strategies I've decided on. Like, I'm not about to recommend these as strategies, but one of the things that I became aware through the process of doing the PhD that I do is I disassociate in spaces that are sensorially overwhelming. It's like my brain isn't doing the filtering, and so I just disconnect from my brain a little bit, and it means that I can access those spaces, but it comes at a cost, which is why I wouldn't necessarily recommend it as an approach. And my work that I was doing in my research was participant observation informed by ethnography and sensory ethnography. So I was working with people, and it's qualitative research, so the researcher is a part of, you don't imagine that you can stand at a distance and be neutral. You are a part of the environment that you're occupying. And if I was doing pure ethnography, my aim would be to occupy that environment and to make as few changes as possible, to not affect, my aim is to go into that space and experience it as it is, not meddle with it. Whereas I was bringing in giant blue eggs and ping pong ball sleeves, so I was very much meddling with my environment, but I wasn't doing that with any particular, like a different participant observation might be somebody who wants to find out if singing during maths lessons makes people learn maths better. So they would go in and maybe sing and take part in math lessons, and as they participated in those experiences, they'd be observing for very particular things. Am I getting greater engagement with maths? What sort of singing is going on? I hadn't got a direction in that regard. I was just a part of the experience, and I wanted to see how we could work together. So it's that kind of, it's sort of ethnography, but it's not, because I meddled with the environment. It's a mishmash between the two. But as I was reading into ethnographic practice, I was really inspired by sensory ethnography. What a surprise. And so you read the sensory ethnography book by Sarah Pink, and it is an encouragement to pay attention to sensory experience. And I'm like, yep, me, I can do that. I'm your girl for that. And it's an odd one, because I didn't really think that, it's not that other people aren't paying attention, it's that they're not automatically taking in that information in the way that I am. And when she is encouraging people to take in that information, she's maybe imagining that person doing the maths study where they're playing the music and doing the maths, and she's sort of saying, notice what smells are coming through the room, notice how it feels to be in, notice all the other things as well, because there's more information than just what song is playing and how much maths is happening. But I read it and it says, pay attention to sensory information more, and so I tried really hard to do that. And there's a cost, because if I'm working in a space where, in order to survive in that space, I have to disassociate because it's too much of a sensory environment for me, now I'm being asked not only to not use my coping strategy, but also to kind of take in even more, and I'm already taking in extra. And when I tried to do that, it had it's a kind of rupture effect. You lose processing of the rest of, I'm trying to think of how it's like if you were surfing, if you're standing on a surfboard and surfing. I used to surf badly, but medium level. You have to feel the board and you feel the wind in your face, and you're instinctively moving to cope with that environment. If you consciously do those things, if you second guess yourself, if you try and feel it more, it goes too far and you fall off. It's not a clear analogy, but the feeling, the reason I went for that analogy is because when I try and articulate what it's like to feel too much, or to not be able to process the sensations that you feel quickly enough, the most alike feeling that I can think of to that is falling off a surfboard in a big swell, because you plummet and you're underwater, and for your own survival you've got to get to the surface, but you have no way of knowing, you've got nothing that you can process that tells you where you might see a bit of light over there, but then you're moved and you can't get there. And that's what it's like when you fall out of kilter with the sensory world. And the interesting thing about doing the analysis is that once you've spotted one of these themes, then you have a look around at the literature to go, okay, well, where does this fit? And there are lots of researchers writing about embodied sensation as a form of knowing, as an epistemology, it'll start with epist, as an epistem. Indeed, Sarah Pink, in her book Sensory Ethnography, argues for perception as a form of knowing. And then you look at other writers like Damien Milton or Monique Botha or Judy Davidson, I think, or I'll put them. And they are talking about the intensity of autistic embodiment. And so if sensing is a way of knowing, then autistic sensing is another way of knowing. It's like more intense. And it's just, there are practical relevances. Me taking the advice to try and sense more was not helpful to me. It could be that the autistic researcher is told just, do regular sensing. But also there could be situations in which you need somebody who takes in all that information, and then it might be relevant to think, maybe we'll get an autistic researcher to do this. And then there's other things where if you were the autistic researcher trying to find out that thing about maths, then probably doing it in a space where you weren't having to contend with so many other sensations would increase your capacity to do that. But anyway, so the first theme was something to do with sensory intensity and overwhelm and balancing that, and sensation as a form of knowing, and autistic sensation being a particular form of that form of knowing.